Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third seminar of the Digital Classicist series of summer 2020. And today I have with me my co-organizer, Gabriel Bodar, and our two speakers, Marton Ribary from the University of Surrey School of Law. And Marton is also a Leverhulme postgraduate fellow. Postdoctoral fellow, sorry, and Barbara McGillivray from the University of Cambridge and the Alan Turing Institute. I'm now going to give the room to, we have just been joined by as well, and I will now ask you all to mute yourselves, and I'm going to give the light to Marton, that is going to talk about The Thing Is Mine, extracting the terminology of the Roman law of ownership from Justinian's Digest. So thank you, Marton. You're on.
Okay, I'm switching to my Google Slides, and I hit present. Give me a couple of seconds until the presentation loads.
Okay. We're seeing you at the moment, Marton. If you want to start, I'll switch to your slides as soon as they show up.
I already did. I think that there is a lag.
There they are.
Okay. So it takes a couple of seconds to load up. That we have some bandwidth issue here, but I start talking because I don't have to change slides immediately. As advertised, the presentation is entitled "The Thing Is Mine: Extracting the Terminology of the Roman Law of Ownership from Justinian's Digest." There is a slight change, not a big one. The change is that instead of using the ownership as the focus of the presentation, it will be rather a case study in which we extract the terminology of Roman law from Justinian's Digest in general. The ownership is changing from being the focus to a case study. This presentation is based on a collaboration between myself and Barbara, which is a meeting between legal history and computational linguistics. And it's a collaboration which stretches back to 2016, when in the final year of my PhD studies, I wrote a message to Barbara asking about an NLP, a natural language processing question related to my PhD. And that developed into something exciting. I attended a summer school given by Barbara in Oxford, the Text-to-Tech summer school. And after my PhD, Barbara was kind enough to work with me on a postdoctoral fellowship, which materialized. And this presentation is part of that fellowship, a sub-project of a 3-year project, which I carry out as a Leverhulme Early Career Research Fellow at the School of Law at the University of Surrey. So it will be me talking today, but it's not only me who have done the job. Barbara is very much so there and very much part of this presentation, and she will be there in the Q&A. But for now, you have to bear with me and my voice. There are 4 large parts, basically 3 large parts of the presentation: corpus, clustering, and word embeddings, which is a zoom-in exercise. We concentrate on the document in the first part, in the corpus part, where we say that the Romans are tidier than they look. We zoom in a bit closer when we start clustering sections of that corpus. And we urge the theorists to step aside and leave the clustering job to the practitioners. And we zoom in even more on the word level when we do word embeddings and demonstrate that lawyers speak a different language. And in the final part, next steps, I will say a few words about the future plans to carry on with this project. So in these 4 parts, in the corpus part, we shall preserve the ancient metadata. That's our aim. In the clustering part, our aim is to discover the structure of Roman law, not according to a theory from the bottom up, from the top down, from the bottom up. And in the word embeddings part, we aim to identify semantic neighbors in general and legal language. So let's start with the corpus. So this is the first step when we take the text as a whole, as a document. Our text is none other than the digest, which is a historical source book of Roman law, arranged in 432 thematic sections. It includes 9,132 passages, quoted passages, from 37 jurists, ancient Roman jurists, and about 300 legal works. The digest is almost an exclusive source for Roman law. It's by and large true that we have no access to these jurists and their works other than the digest. The digest itself was compiled by the chief jurist Tribonian, who was given the task by the Emperor Justinian in 530. And in less than 3 years, Tribonian and his editorial committee came up with the 50 books of the digest, excerpting about 2 million lines of legal works to create what we have today. The job is extraordinary, and possibly even more extraordinary, the history and the text that we have from this project. The oldest manuscript dates to 554, so it's just 20 years after the official publication of the digest, which is quite an extraordinary set of circumstances. This manuscript is the Littera Florentina, which is very tidy. It has all these passages with bibliographic headings in a nice and legible script. So the next step when we make our journey from the manuscript to the relational database, which is the last step, is the printed edition, which is largely based on the manuscript of the Littera Florentina. It was edited, among others, by Theodor Mommsen, a name that you may be familiar from Wilga Root's presentation from last week. And this printed edition, which was published as part of a larger project which published the entire corpus of Roman law, came to light in 1889 and stays in use up until today. This printed edition, which is based largely on the Littera Florentina, was the input for the digital edition of Roman law in the ROM Text Database, developed by researchers at the University of Linz, a project which started in the 1970s. It's very, very old. How old it is, just to give an idea, it was started on punch cards, and it was largely done manually. Which you can see when working on the text. You see some inconsistencies and some typographical errors, which is very similar to someone reading scribes and their manuscripts. So that's something special. This project, which started on punch cards, was later adapted to an DOS interface. The text of the digest and other Roman legal sources could be queried in the shell, and it was Peter Riedelberger who gave this powerful and tidy presentation, a graphical user interface in the amanuensis project, which you can see on on the screen a screenshot from the amanuensis. It is something that Peter continues to update regularly. And it was this, the amanuensis interface, where we pulled the text of the digest. So on this screen, on this slide, you see the processing flowchart in which we created our relational database. On the top part, you see two red boxes. On the right-hand side, that's the amanuensis box. That's the text of the digest. On the left-hand side, that's another input which includes information about the compositional structure of the digest. And the flowchart gives an indication about the manual and machine-assisted parts that we brushed these two parts together to create a highly structured and solid flat files which are marked by yellow and blue color on the bottom of that flowchart. And these flat files were used when we took the next step and created a SQL relational database with 6 tables. We created a skeleton database with primary and foreign keys to ensure that when we start loading information into the database, we can't violate any of the restrictions. So by this method, we ensured that what we load into the database, there may be typographical errors, but the links are rock solid, and it can be queried to give structured information. The colors stand for textual data, that's blue, compositional information, that's green, and a yellow box jurist, which is in on the bottom part, which is very important for dating the individual passages and text units of the digest. So this SQL database, lightweight SQL database, can be downloaded from the Figshare repository and can be loaded in an open source interface. Here, one example is a browser interface, SQLite Online. I show you a screenshot on the screen. We can run a SQL query in this example to count the number of text units in an era, and that gives an information about the different passages in the digest. E for early, C- for early classical, late classical, and post-classical. And you can see that there is a bit of a disproportionate amount of late classical passages in the digest. Another example of SQL query could be how many times does the term proprietas appear in the different periods. Here the result is printed on the screen. And you can obviously then go closer and open up those passages to have a closer look on what the text looks like. So that was the first part. We recreated the structure, preserved the ancient metadata that the silent but very much present editors left in the digest. The digest, which is already highly structured, which includes thematic sections. It includes bibliographic headings for each of the passages. And our job was to create a relational database which puts that linear information, the information which can be accessed in a linear format in the manuscript and the printed edition, in something more flexible in a SQL relational database, which puts the modern reader in the position of the editor-in-chief Tribonian, who sees everything but without getting lost in the details. So now we zoom in a touch closer to the text. Instead of taking the corpus as a whole, we have a look on the 432 thematic sections in it. What we want to achieve in this part is to discover the structure of Roman law from the bottom up, based on the textual data that we have, without any preconceived theoretical assumptions. Just to give an idea what that theoretical structure of law could look like, here on this screen you see the institutional system of Roman law according to the jurist Gaius, where law in a tree-like structure is divided into public and private. Private law divided into civil, into law of coming from the state, coming from the nations, and coming from nature. And the interest of Gaius lies in the law of the state, which he divides into three parts: the law of persons, the law of things, and the law of actions. Or another more modern system would be something like this, where private law is divided into well-known branches of law, something like family, property, contract, and tort. So this is not what we want to come up with. We want to discover a structure which is already there, not a top-down, a theoretical structure, but a structure that the texts themselves create. So we want to work with minimal assumptions, don't make any subjective decisions. And in order to do that, we wanted to invite the help of the machine and transform the textual data of the thematic sections into numbers, which will be then clustered into something like this that you see on the screen in a tree-like structure. Our only working assumptions were that the section is thematically homogeneous, and that the digest is a comprehensive representation of what Roman law is. Even though it's not a system, it is a comprehensive representation. To get the text ready, I show you on this slide the pipeline that we went through, which includes 5 steps. The first step of which is pre-process. So what it does, that it transforms a sentence of the digest, or a section, a thematic section of the digest, an example of which you see on the top of the screen, into something which you see on the bottom of the screen. And to go into more detail, in the first step, in the pre-process step, we take the raw textual data, we turn everything to lowercase, remove non-ASCII, in this case Greek characters, we remove all punctuation, and we remove all white space to have a text as you see in the bottom of the screen. We then tokenize this text to create a list of word tokens, as you see on the top of the screen. We then lemmatize these list of word tokens by using the back-off Latin lemmatizer of the Classical Language Toolkit developed by Patrick Burns, which outputs a list of tuples, where the first element of the tuple is the word token, and the second element of the tuple is the lemma, the dictionary entry of that particular token. We then remove the stop words according to a custom stop list that we created by the Latin stop module of the Classical Language Toolkit. These stop words are the frequent words with low semantic value, and as you see on the top of the screen, we removed a couple of them, like out and ut. And in the final step, we create a string document of lemmas by retaining only the second element of the tuple, the lemma, the dictionary entry, and that's how the pipeline is completed, and that's how we get a list of lemmas created from the raw text from the top of the screen to something which looks more like a text in the bottom. Now comes the even more exciting part, when we turn the text to numbers by using a method called the TF-IDF, term frequency inverse document frequency. And I would like to give you a quick idea how that works and how we create a matrix in the shape of 339 and 4029 from the text of the digest taken in sections. So the example used here is one of the sentences that you've seen in the previous part, which I supplemented with two completely made up sentences. So we have 3 sentences as an input here. And in the first step, we represent these sentences shown in the rows of the table on the top of the screen, 1, 2, 3. And in the fields or the columns of the table, you see the words which are present in those sentences. Each time a word appears in a sentence, we count 1, and that's why you see scribo stated twice in the first and the second sentence, but 0 for the third, because it does not appear in the third sentence. So if you remove the labels of the rows and the columns, we have a matrix, a simple matrix, which is a representation of the textual data on the bottom of the screen. And we use this to create a vector representation of the whole textual data of the digest. The output is a matrix in the shape of 432 and 10,865, where 432 stands for the number of sections we have in the digest, and the 10,000 stands for the unique lemmas in the digest. This is obviously extremely large. It's very difficult to work with. So we had an extra step to reduce the dimensions by removing the short sections which have 100 or less unique lemmas, and retaining only the top 50 terms in each of the sections, those terms which are more characteristic, the most characteristic in those sections. Discounting the overlaps, that creates a slightly slimmer matrix in the shape of 339 and 4029. So that is the numerical input for the scikit-learn hierarchical clustering module that we used to create a tree-like structure for the hierarchical structure for the textual data of the digest in a dendrogram, where we move from all 339 sections closer to the left-hand side of the screen, which are merged and merged together until they are all collapsed into one. As you see in the table on the right-hand side, we start with one unit, which is then branched into 2 major branches. And as we move further away from the branch of this tree-like structure towards the twigs and the leaves, the number of clusters increase in number. Then in the next step, we had to translate back the numerical information back to text to create a tree structure which is more readable for a human. This is the result. You see the 2 major branches. The left is something related to inheritance. The right is something related to everything else. And to give you an idea what a cluster look like, it has the number with the number of sections inside that cluster, and we printed the top 10 terms in that cluster, which an intuitive idea about the theme which keeps the cluster together. In this case, that theme is inheritance. When we had a closer look to get an idea about how the themes manifest themselves in this tree-like structure, when we looked for so-called ownership clusters, we noticed that they are spread across the corpus. We have a cluster related to usufruct, public property, dowry, theft, pledge, sale, manumission, allowance, and inheritance spread across the corpus. So contrary to a theoretical structure of law, which creates a branch of law according to sort of almost a metaphysical idea, here what we see that the ownership, the concept of ownership is spread across the corpus, which is organized more according to a practical considerations, what the practicing lawyers face in their daily work. So moving on to the next part, we zoom in even further. We zoom into those terms that we saw in the clusters. We zoom in to the level of words in the corpus of the digest to demonstrate that these lawyers speak a different language, and we compare that language to a general language. We do something similar. We represent the textual data with numbers. In the previous part, we represented the textual data of the thematic sections. In this part, we represent the textual data of a word. What the method we used is word embeddings, which is a usage-based approach. It assumes that the meaning of the word, the semantics, is defined by the textual context of a word, meaning that a word can be represented by the words which are generally found around it, or in a other approach by the characters which are generally found around a word. To give an idea how this works, very simply, I used the 3 sentences as I used in the previous part to represent 2 words, the target words of use and lex, according to 3 dimensions, the dimensions of scribo, graecus, and romanus. We have a corpus, a small corpus of 3 sentences, and we count the number of times scribo, graecus, and romanus appear around these words in the corpus. That gives us a 2, 1, 0 vector for use, and a 1, 0, 1 vector for lex in a 3-dimensional space, where the axes are scribo, graecus, and romanus. So by this method, we can represent words by vectors, and we can measure their relative distance from each other, with the assumption that the closer these vectors are, the closer their meanings are. Obviously, we don't use only 3 dimensions, not just scribo, graecus, romanus. We use a much higher dimension when we use word embeddings, and it's not term frequency, but it's a neural network approach that the word embeddings models of word2vec and fast text use. So we chose fast text and with the parameters suggested by a Latin embedding project as part of the linking Latin project based at Milan. In a work led by Rachele Spugnoli and her colleagues, they trained and evaluated Latin word embeddings models on two large corpora, the Corpus Thomisticum of the works of Thomas Aquinas, and the Laszlo corpus, which includes classical Latin authors. They experimented with the word2vec and the fast text word embeddings model. They used two different methods and two different word vector dimensions. And according to their evaluation, fast text and skipgram and the word vector dimension of 100 came out on top. So we took these parameters when we created our own models. There is already one general Latin language model created by the Lila project on the Laszlo corpus. We took this word embeddings model as it is, partly because we were unable to train the model ourselves, as the Laszlo is found behind a paywall. This corpus, which is developed by the Laboratoire d'analyse statistique de langue ancienne at the University of Liège, is developed and maintained since 1962, and it includes 154 works. It allows corpus selection, lemma search, and many other options. But unfortunately, it is found behind a paywall. So we took this model as it is, but we trained our own model based on another very large Latin corpus. A Latin corpus which was developed by Barbara. It includes 13 million words. It covers a time span from the 2nd century until the 21st. And it includes a rich metadata, author, title, genre, and also a lemma and part of speech information. We did some pre-processing, and we trained our model on this Latinized corpus using fast text and the parameters that the Lila people used on Laszlo. And we did the same on the text of the digest, and we also did a similar thing on the complete ROM text corpus, of which digest is a part. And you see the basic information of these corpora on the screen now, the first of which, Latinized and Laszlo, are general language corpora, and the last two, ROM text and digest, are legal corpora. So the question at this point was, how do these models perform? How do we evaluate them? So for this, we used the multiple choice question test developed by the Lila project that they used to evaluate their own models. How this works, you see a few examples on the screen. There is a target word, and the model is asked to pick the one which the model thinks is the most synonymous with the target word. These 4 options, they are created by Latin experts. The correct answer, which in the case of Civitas is urbs, they are approved by a Latin expert. This benchmark was created and validated by Lila. It includes not just 5, it includes more than 2,000 multiple choice questions. And we use this benchmark to evaluate the 4 models by creating pairwise similarity scores and ask the model to pick the word which has the highest similarity score. And if that happens to be the one that the benchmark defines as a synonym, that's one correct multiple choice question answer by the model. Here you see that the digest model fails to find the correct synonym for civitas. It gives incursio. It is an interesting question why the model gives this as a closer semantic neighbor than orbs. And you see that ROM text as well as LASLA gives this incorrect answer when faced with this particular multiple choice question. And it is only Latinize which by a small margin successfully identifies orbs as the synonym of civitas. Obviously, we did the evaluation not just one, but on all more than 2,000 questions. And by the evaluation, Latinize came out on top with almost 90% of correct answers. And in general, the two general language corpora performed much better than the legal one, of which the reason might be either the size of the corpus or the reason that the evaluation is designed for a general language corpus, and hence a genre-specific corpus underperforms. To demonstrate this a bit closer, we close on to our inheritance cluster, and I will now try to do a bit of a demo, and hopefully I have enough bandwidth to do that. I hope you see the screen with the demo right now. Here I've already loaded into this Jupyter notebook the four models of LASLA, Latinize, ROM text, and the digest, and I defined a custom function to calculate the top semantic neighbors. Just to give one example of tempus, that's one of the words that we see in the inheritance clusters. When we run this, we see that ROM text gives 30 years and 20 years as semantic neighbors for tempus, compared to the two general Latin language corpus of Latinize and LASLA, which gives temporal ideas which are more linked to personal life rather than one's legal life. Another example is adeo. As you see, adeo, which is used in an adverbial, can be used in an adverbial sense. In the Latinize and LASLA corpus, this adverbial sense is captured. In ROM text, it is taken more in its verbal sense, which means to take up, more specifically to take up inheritance, and that's why we find hereditas as in the top semantic neighbors of adeo. And moving away from the inheritance clusters, just a final example of malus, which unsurprisingly gives similar results in the general corpora of Latinize and LASLA. But in the two legal corpus, the top term is dolus, for the reason that malus, dolus, a technical term for fraud and misrepresentation in legal language that dominates the language of law, and hence dolus and words which can be associated with fraud and misrepresentation is found among the top semantic neighbors. Now I switch back to my slides, and hopefully it will load relatively quickly, so that I can move to the final and very short step of the presentation, which is next steps. A lot has been done, but still a lot to go. And there is more to load than meets the eye, as the motto says. We can continue the project, and we will continue the project to improve the lemmatization. You see in the demo that lemmatization was far from perfect in the corpora. For the clustering part, we aim to incorporate additional information, specifically the titles of the thematic sections that the ancient editors gave to those sections, and give some weight to the textual information in the titles, and use them for vectorization, which could result in an even better clustering. We also will continue on tuning the word embeddings models, and we'll use a more sophisticated evaluation of the word embeddings, specifically to create evaluations which focus on the genre, to compare how the general and the legal corpora work on this. And we will also want to deliver on our promise to detect lexical semantic change by creating time slices and using current methods to identify diachronic shifts in meaning. So this is the end of my presentation. You see the references 1 and 2 on the picture, and I give the word back to the organizers to conduct the Q&A.
You're muted, Valeria.
Thank you, Gabby. And thank you very much, Martin and Barbara. That was very, very interesting. And I would also like to point out how beautifully, Martin, you made references to so many other projects going on in digital classics. And some of them we have, had as guests in the past year. So I think that your work really captured the spirit of this community. So special thanks for that, for showing that we can build on top of the work of others and do new things and better things. I see a few questions. Before we start, is there anyone in the call that wants to ask a first question to our speakers? Okay, let's have the public break their eyes. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to use the YouTube chat to ask the YouTube comments to ask questions. We will see them in our chat. And I will actually start with a comment from Margherita Fantoli that is saying, if you're interested, LASLA files are available for free after signing a data transfer agreement, completely for free. The whole corpus. You can contact me. So if anyone listening is interested, if Martin and Barbara are interested, Margherita is very nicely and kindly making that known to us.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you.
We have a question from Hermogenian. I'm curious whether practice or practical structures reflects litigation, management of private affairs, or professional juristic advice.
This needs a closer inspection of the output. Well, what I'm expecting to see is that our project will confirm the theory that Roman law is, if you wish, litigation focused. It is more a procedural approach that is dominant when the thematic sections are created. Here I partly repeating the idea of my supervisor Francesco Giglio and others in the Romanist community who argued that a taxonomy of Roman law should be or should be based on this procedural approach rather than a theory which was dominant in the 19th century, the Pandectist era. That phrase in the title of the presentation, "The thing is mine," gives an indication for that idea. The thing is mine is a formula. Res meum esse. It is a formula which captures the idea, the concept of ownership in Roman law more than any definition or high metaphysical approach that later jurists and especially modern Romanists try to use. So we expect a litigation, a procedural approach when creating that practice-oriented bottom-up clustering.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. I think you broke up a little bit. I hope that our friend got enough of your answer. I think we got the general sense of it. And Margherita Fantoli forgot to ask her actual question, which is, which tool did you use for lemmatizing? Based on which dictionary?
We used the Beckhoff Latin lemmatizer, which is part of the classical language toolkit. That is a lemmatizer developed by Patrick Burns, who was present here in this forum in the first week. It is not one dictionary; it is a multiple tools which are chained together. The first element is indeed a dictionary for terms which can be lemmatized in an unambiguous manner. And if that fails, the Beckhoff method loads the information, the word token to the next in the chain. And I just have a quick look. So the first is a dictionary. The second is a training data which was created on the Perseus project. The third element is a regular expression-based lemmatizer. The fourth one is based on the Morpheus project. And the fifth one is when none of these work, in which case the lemmatizer returns the word token itself. So it's not one dictionary, it's actually four, which are chained together in one tool.
Thank you, Martin. Barbara, if you at any time want to jump in and add anything, feel free to. We also had Patrick speaking, being a guest of this series. So we have him talking about this tool in a previous seminar, I think a couple of summers ago. Let's move to the next question for our speakers. Okay, I will now attempt at pronouncing German. No, I won't, sorry. The question is, if concepts relating to ownership are spread across the entire corpus, what are examples of concepts that are more isolated?
If the question is whether there is one large concept, overarching concept like ownership, my answer is I don't know yet. If the question is whether we are able to identify a smaller concept like theft or allowance, we are able to pinpoint the clusters. there is definitely one aspect which seems to be materializing in multiple runs of the clustering exercise, is that inheritance forms a significant branch in any of those trials. So that is probably comparable in terms of size to the concept of ownership. But in order to find well isolated concepts, we need to go to smaller concepts. As I mentioned, theft, usufruct, and sale. But for the more theoretical ones, that needs further exploration and possibly creating different distances and focusing on the clusters and having a look at the textual data of not just the top terms, but actually reading the text of those sections.
Okay, thank you. Got a couple more questions for you. Are there any provisional conclusions you have discovered regarding the results of a semantic analysis of ownership? That's a big one.
Yes, one that confirms the hypothesis of Francesco Giglio, Hans Ankum, and others, and Walter Pohl, that there is no such thing as a concept of ownership. That is a theoretical construction which is modern, possibly 19th century, and it is not an overarching concept which is present in this highly metaphysical form in the ancient world. So that ownership is present as a formula. The thing is mine. It is present in procedures. It is present in legal practice, but it is not present as a philosophical concept. And that tells us something about how Roman law operates, which is not as theoretical as one might think reading textbooks about Roman law written in the modern era.
Thank you. That's a very, very interesting point, and that's actually the kind of question that I was also very keen on asking. So thank you to Jashang for having asked that. Okay, there is one last from Andreas. Have you thought about investigating dynamics of embeddings, early versus post-classical semantic neighbors, etc.?
Yes, these are the time slices that I mentioned in the next steps. This is the next step, something which I will start working on with Barbara, maybe not tomorrow, because tomorrow is Saturday, but possibly on Monday. We face some challenges though, and that is because it is not as easy to create those time slices. It is a bit arbitrary, and the corpus for is not as large as one might want it to be. We don't really have enough data, especially for the early and the post-classical period. We have a few hundred in those periods. The majority of the textual data are from the classical period of Roman law, which we split into in that sample SQL query into early and late. And you might have seen that we have a significantly larger amount in the late classical period. If you do an analysis based on the jurists, you'll see that this is partly because that there are a couple of towering figures in the digest which dominate the passages. It is Ulpian and Papinian that Tribonian and the editors preferred to others. One possibility is, but it's in very labor-intensive route, is to identify quotes within quotes. So meaning when a jurist quotes some earlier juristic passage, we can isolate that and associate a date to it. How it could be automated or made less labor-intensive and painful, I don't know yet. But that's one possible avenue we could take. After all, we know about the 12 tables because it is quoted by some of these jurists quoted in the digest. For this preliminary exercise, we used the jurists and we used the date associated with the jurists to date the textual data. But there could be another step.
Yeah, just wanted to add that this is a very active research. Yes. No, can you hear me? Now, just wanted to add that this is very active research area in natural language processing and computational linguistics, but there is definitely a big gap with the digital classics and digital humanities community. So the challenges that Marton listed it's exactly the kind of thing that make it interesting to apply this research on classical texts. I did some initial experiments on ancient Greek, found publications I've done on my page, and they will definitely pursue this further. So watch this space.
Thank you both. We have actually a small request from Jashong. If Marton, if you could please type maybe in the comments that bibliographical reference, the name of the study that you said your project helped to confirm. I think you said it was your supervisor study. If you could, just give maybe a bibliographical handle for someone to read more about it.
I just posted. We haven't seen it yet, but it is on YouTube. A reference to. Oh, here it is. Is it Giglio 2018? Is that the one?
That sounds like the right one. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Gabi. That's perfect.
Yes. And that. Yes, and that's Francesco's article, which discusses the theory and other scholars working on this field. So it's a good place to start with. Yeah, that is the one.
Great, thank you. I think that people will go and look for it after this. There are actually a couple more questions that popped up. And one is, again, from Alexander. I'm going to try this. Zwenicke. I hope I've not butchered your surname. Apologies if I did. Alexander says, thank you. I'm interested in the usefulness of modularity in approaching Roman law, the interrelatedness of different concepts and doctrines. Where will you be publishing your results?
So the first step will be to publish based on this presentation, concentrating more on the technical sides. That will be in a digital humanities venue. But as Andreas pointed out, there is enough here to discuss the results in a legal journal. That will come later this year to put the results of this research we conducted with Barbara in the Romanist in a legal environment. Where it is going to be published, I don't know. The manuscript needs to be written first and then submitted, so that's out of my hand. But I encourage to keep in touch, and if there's more people out there interested in modularity, which is one aspect of Roman law, but not just Roman law, and I possibly want to emphasize that this project uses Roman law as a playground, but it's not a lar pour lar exercise. Barbara and I would like to create some approaches and some methods which could be applied to modern law. We are not just challenging the institutional framework of Roman law created by Gaius and the Pandectists of the 19th century. We also like to challenge the theoretical branching of law of modern law to identify these textual clusters, which give possibly a more down to earth, more practical idea about how law operates. Law does not operate in isolation of branches. When I teach contract law, I need to have some idea how the law of tort or even criminal law operates. There is no such thing in life that it can only be put in one bag of contract law or one bag of ownership. Law as a social science deals with reality which is very messy, very complex, and it is described by many of these theoretical concepts, and we hope that our work be able to come up with a tool in which that complexity can be captured a little bit better, where applying the law as it is to the facts could work a little bit better. That initial mapping stage of a lawyer could be assisted by our work. That is the idea.
Okay, I think we have a very nice last question from Andreas Wagner again, and I think it's a very good way to close this seminar. Did you find anything that challenges or even runs counter to traditional legal historical opinion?
I can repeat the theoretical approach, but it's there are already people out there challenging that, so it's not quite new. Saying that legal language is different from general language, but it's also not quite new. So I think this is an open-ended research. This is still waiting for discovery. It is at times frustrating when we start with a hypothesis and it doesn't hold true. We can't justify that by the analysis we make. But at some other points we find some new insights. So another aspect, I don't know if is that we wanted to do some more work on the structure of the document. Andreas might know about the Blume-Kruger theory, which is about how the digest came to be. How was it possible? That's one great mystery of Roman law. How was it possible that the digest was compiled in no more than 3 years? If that is true, that they compiled from 2 million lines, that's not even possible in the 21st century with quantum computers. There is one theory which tries to give an explanation how it was possible. And this is something which is well highly regarded, the Bloom-Krüger theory about the compositional structure. The 3 editorial rooms in Tribonian's editing house. Well, I think it can be challenged as it has been done by a scholar called David Pugsley, who thinks that it wasn't a brand new project. So what happened that Tribonian and his colleagues took an already existing digest, which we don't have anymore, and used it as a template, and basically filled in the gaps, but didn't change much. That is in a nutshell David Pugsley's theory. And we hope that when we analyze with the machine how the jurists, the quotations are distributed into the 432 thematic sections, we will find that theory, if not proven, then supported. So that could be another challenging that compositional theory of Bloom and Krüger.
Great, thank you. I think there are no more questions from our audience online. Gabi, Lucia, do you want to ask something to Marton and Barbara?
I've got a fairly technical question, which I probably should have asked at the beginning, because it's probably less interesting than all these theoretical discussions we've just been having. But I was struck by your example where you remove non-ASCII characters from your text, and I wondered how many Greek words were therefore deleted from this corpus as a result, either as a rough number of words or as a proportion of the corpus, and if you had a sense of what sort of content and context you were losing from your research by having removed those words, as compared to, for example, or let's say whether you think there would be any value to having done this as a bilingual study, including the Greek word.
For the digest, the Greek is not much. That's a handful of passages that include Greek words in the digest. It's predominantly Latin, so we are not losing much. It could be done as a bilingual project. Yes, it needs to be a bit smarter, and I think that would be justified, if not for the digest, but for the Codex of Justinian, which uses Latin and Greek at approximately at equal measure. So that's possibly the answer. That for the digest, we are not losing much at this early stage. It would have made our life very complicated, trying to combine Latin and Greek lemmatizers, teach the machine to identify Latin and Greek. That could be done by simple ASCII character recognition. Well, I think we're not losing much, but for the Codex, definitely, and for later Byzantine legal text, if that is combined with Roman law to show the show the afterlife of Roman law in the Byzantine Empire, which predominantly speaks Greek, and starts speaking Greek even in legal matters, yes, a bilingual approach could be justified.
Yeah, and just want to say, as a compromise, we could have also just replaced all the Greek text with a standard string like Greek word, as it's done in Latinized, which would have not allowed us to do very much with Embeddings. We would have kept the information that there was a Greek word there, and that would have been added to the list of unknown words by the lemmatizer. But yeah, thank you.
Good. I think that we are ready to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Marton and Barbara. That was really interesting, and I'm really happy also that we have introduced an angle that is the legal one that we have not seen very often in this series. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to everyone that watched live and to everyone that will watch it later on, and see you next week. We have more talk about prosopography, and next week will be again at 5:30 UK time. Bye.